While packing her husband for a business trip, Nicole noticed that her mother-in-law was behaving strangely and peeking into her wallet near the airplane ramp. "And bring me the sweater," Aaron instructed, looking at his wife. Nicole frowned, making it clear that she was displeased. This was the third business trip her husband was taking this month. She was tired of spending every weekend alone with their daughter. She wanted, like any normal family, to go somewhere together. "Is this going to be the last trip?" Nicole asked, handing him his things. Her voice sounded as if she were deeply hurt. "That depends on management," replied the head of the family. "Do you think I like this? If it were up to me, I'd spend every weekend with you." "Then talk to your boss," she continued. "Explain that you have a wife and a young daughter, and they both need your attention." The couple was raising their 5-year-old daughter, Dana, together, though the girl was adopted. Nicole had found her on the doorstep of the pediatric clinic where she worked as a nurse. It was late, and Nicole was about to head home when she stumbled upon a white bundle from which crying sounds were coming. She adored children and couldn't walk away. It seemed the little girl had been abandoned. Nicole was immediately struck by the idea of taking her in. Within a few days, thanks to surveillance cameras from a store across the street, they managed to track down the negligent mother. The woman renounced her parental rights, as she had no means of supporting herself. She could have at least left her inside the clinic, Nicole lamented. But to abandon a child outside, where she could have frozen or died, that takes a heartless woman. After that, Nicole adopted the baby, and she and her husband named her Dana. Unfortunately, it was soon discovered that the child had developed mental issues. She took a very long time to learn to walk and hold her head up. Doctors even said that she might never be able to stand. However, with massages and various treatments, Dana eventually started walking. But the problems didn't stop there. The girl continued to lag behind her peers. What if she never outgrows this? Aaron frowned. "I'm not ready for her to be dependent on me for the rest of her life." "That won't happen," Nicole answered confidently. "Dana is a strong girl. She'll overcome everything and catch up with her peers." Aaron didn't particularly believe this, but didn't try to argue with his wife. "If I talk to my boss, I'm afraid I won't have a job anymore," Aaron said with a smirk. There was nothing to say to that. Losing a job was dangerous because finding a new one seemed quite difficult, especially when money was desperately needed. Given that they were raising a special needs child, that need was constant. "Nicole, leave him alone." "It's pointless anyway," said her mother-in-law Tina with a wave of her hand. "Here, put this pocket knife in too." Nicole sighed. Tina had spent the entire morning instructing her on what her son needed to take with him. "And what does he need that for?" Nicole chuckled but complied nonetheless. "It'll come in handy," Tina said confidently. Nicole had a trusting relationship with her mother-in-law. However, lately, Tina had become so involved in their lives that Nicole was starting to believe every joke she'd ever heard about meddlesome mothers-in-law. Since they had never argued before, Nicole felt awkward asking Tina to stop interfering in their lives. Instead, she asked her husband to subtly hint that his mother should ease up and let him go. "Really, talk to her. I respect your mom a lot, but sometimes her advice gets on my nerves." "Come on, she just wants what's best for us," Aaron would reply. And in the end, nothing changed, leaving Nicole to tolerate it. Once the packing was finished, the couple headed to the airport together. "Come back soon, okay?" Nicole asked as her husband went through check-in. "You know it doesn't depend on me," Aaron shrugged, and with that, they said their goodbyes. As Nicole passed by a coffee shop, she couldn't resist and reached into her wallet to treat herself to a small cappuccino. But the next moment, she completely forgot about wanting coffee. Somehow, there was a note in her wallet, written in large letters, "Be careful." An inexplicable feeling of anxiety spread through her body. Of course, it could have been someone's stupid prank, but for some reason, Nicole didn't think so. "Miss, are you in line?" came an annoyed voice from behind her, and she had to step aside. Checking the time, Nicole realized her husband's plane had already taken off, calling him now was impossible. She decided to head home but couldn't stop thinking about the note. Analyzing her recent movements, she concluded that the only person who could have left the message was Tina. There was no one else. But if she wanted to warn me about something, why not just say it outright? Her inner voice questioned. With that, Nicole quickened her pace, determined to talk to Tina. At home, a new shock awaited her. As soon as she knocked on the door, it wasn't her mother-in-law who opened it, but police officers. "What happened?" she asked, utterly confused. In the next moment, she saw her mother-in-law. The elderly woman stood in handcuffs, but instead of fear, her face showed calm acceptance of the situation. "Am I correct in assuming you are Nicole Freeman?" the lieutenant asked, ignoring her question. "Yes," she replied, bewildered. "Do you know where your husband is right now?" the officer continued questioning. "He's on a business trip. His plane took off no more than an hour ago," Nicole answered, growing more and more anxious. "What's going on? Why are you asking me these questions?" She was on the verge of exploding. "At the moment, we are detaining members of a criminal organization, of which your relatives are a part," the officer replied with a smirk. Nicole felt her eye twitch. This sounded so absurd that she wanted to laugh, but the situation was anything but funny. "Are you serious right now?" she asked, looking at her frail, elderly mother-in-law. But instead of protesting or trying to defend herself, Tina just lowered her head, avoiding her daughter-in-law's gaze. "Absolutely," the lieutenant confirmed. The tension grew by the second. "Why aren't you saying anything?" Nicole burst out, addressing Tina, but she still didn't answer. "That's enough, let's go to the station," the officer said. "If you'd like, you can come along. You'll get all the details there." For the first time in her life, Nicole found herself heading to a police station, desperately hoping it would also be the last. After the interrogation, Tina was immediately placed in a cell. No matter how much Nicole pleaded for her release on bail, the authorities were unmoved. The only thing she was granted was a brief visit. "She's an elderly woman," Nicole said, shaking her head as she watched her mother-in-law being led away. "And so what?" the investigator scoffed. "You think pensioners don't commit crimes? The law is the same for everyone." Nicole had to wait until late evening to be allowed to speak with her husband's mother. In the meantime, she remained at the station, answering questions, most of which revolved around Aaron. In the eyes of the police, Aaron was a serious criminal, and they were now trying to determine whether Nicole was his accomplice. "I don't know anything about this," Nicole said firmly. "And I'm sure you're mistaken. My husband and mother-in-law are honest people. They've never done anything wrong in their lives." But the truth began to unravel during Nicole's conversation with Tina. "Please tell me this is all just a horrible misunderstanding," Nicole pleaded as soon as they sat down in the prison. But her mother-in-law only shook her head sadly. "This is going to be a long story," Tina said, leaning back in her chair. Nicole glanced at the time. She had 30 minutes before the officer would come to escort her out. "I'll start with this. Aaron is not my biological son," Tina began with a sigh. "His real mother died when he was just a little boy. I became his nanny at his father's request." Nicole's mouth fell open in shock. Of all the things she expected, this wasn't one of them. Does Aaron know? She wondered to herself. It turned out that Leo, Aaron's father, had been a member of a criminal organization, holding a prominent position. He controlled the entire city and was essentially a crime lord. However, a power struggle erupted within the gang. Some members began cooperating with the police and soon betrayed their associates. A raid was organized, leading to a shootout. During the chaos, Aaron's father was killed by a bullet from one of his former accomplices. The surviving members of the group were rounded up by the police, and a wave of arrests followed. Law enforcement also went after the relatives of the suspects, as many of the gang members were interconnected. "To keep the child from ending up alone, I pretended to be his mother," Tina continued. "Luckily, the police soon lost interest in us, and we were able to start a new life." "So Aaron knows you're not his mom?" Nicole couldn't help but ask. "Of course, Tina replied with a wry smile. Tina had always led an honest life and had never been involved in any criminal activity. Her boss's dealings had terrified her, but she couldn't abandon Aaron. She quickly grew attached to him and believed she could raise him to be different, ensuring his criminal roots wouldn't take hold. How wrong I was, Tina grimaced. They say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and they're right. Nicole was stunned. She had been clinging to the hope that everything the police had told her was some absurd mistake. But now it was clear, her husband really was a criminal. Did Aaron kill someone? She asked in a trembling voice. I never interfered in his affairs, Tina said, shaking her head. But I wouldn't confidently say he's incapable of it. Nicole felt a chill run through her. It turned out she didn't know the man she'd been living with under the same roof. All those frequent business trips were nothing more than a cover Aaron used to carry out his crimes. Understanding that living in a small town made him more vulnerable to recognition and betrayal, he deliberately traveled far away to ensure no one could identify him or report him to the authorities. He thought of everything, Nicole whispered, swallowing hard. Tina was deeply worried. She still held out hope that her son would come to his senses and put an end to all of this. Despite his actions, she continued to love him with the same affection she had for the little boy left motherless so many years ago. Did Aaron know the police were onto him? Nicole asked, as the puzzle pieces in her mind began to fall into place. Is that why he suddenly went on another business trip? Tina nodded. Aaron got a tip from one of his acquaintances, his mother explained. He realized staying in the city was too dangerous, so he went on the run. Nicole grimaced. It was unsettling to think of her husband as a criminal. Even worse was imagining the harm he might have caused to others. And what will he do now? Nicole asked, her voice tinged with despair as she clutched her head. Does he plan to lie low and come back, or is this the end? But Tina didn't have any answers. Wait, Nicole suddenly straightened up. Why did they take you? You haven't done anything wrong. Try proving that, the older woman said with a wry smile. Despite everything, Tina remained calm. She knew she had no crimes on her conscience, which meant the courts and prison had no real hold over her. She believed the police would figure it out, and it was only a matter of time before she was back home. I got your note, Nicole blurted out, the memory surfacing abruptly. Oh, I was afraid we wouldn't get a chance to see each other, so I wanted to warn you that way, Tina explained. Be careful, Nicole. At those words, Nicole felt a shiver run through her entire body. You're on your own now, Tina continued. You'll have to take care of yourself. The older woman wanted to say more, but she was overcome by a fit of dry coughing. Are you all right? Nicole asked, alarmed. Let me get some water. I'm fine, Tina said, waving her off. Besides, we're in a prison, not a restaurant. They're not exactly going to bring me a glass of water. Tina had been seriously ill for several months. Doctors had given her a grave diagnosis and insisted she begin treatment immediately. However, not only had she refused to start any therapy, but she had also decided not to tell anyone about her condition. It seems I'm destined to spend my final days behind bars, Tina thought with complete acceptance of her situation. She had lived a long life and was ready for whatever came next. If she were released, it would be wonderful. If she didn't live to see that day, then so be it, such was her fate. But Nicole was not prepared to accept this. She was already brainstorming who to contact to find a good lawyer. Don't worry, Nicole said, gently taking Tina's wrinkled hand in her own. I'll get you out of here. Tina just smiled faintly. Soon, the guard arrived to inform them their time was up, and Nicole had to leave. After saying goodbye, Nicole immediately began making phone calls, reaching out to anyone who might help her secure legal representation. She knew Tina couldn't endure long behind bars. Nicole herself had struggled to handle just a half hour in that environment. How could her aging mother-in-law manage longer? Despite the turmoil in her heart, Nicole knew she couldn't afford to wallow. She had to go back to work. Half a day had already been missed, and she couldn't risk more. Thoughts of her marriage consumed her. In just a few hours, her world had been turned upside down, leaving her doubting the man she thought she knew so well. Could a criminal truly be a loving husband and family man? Nicole seriously doubted it now. She became convinced that Aaron's marriage to her had been nothing more than a cover and that his feelings for her were never genuine. Living in a small town only made things worse. News of Tina's arrest spread quickly, becoming the main topic of gossip among nosy neighbors. "I thought Tina was a decent woman," a shocked elderly neighbor remarked. Her daughter, who worked as a janitor at the same clinic as Nicole, ensured the news reached Nicole's workplace too. Consumed by her thoughts, Nicole initially didn't notice the way her colleagues were side-eyeing her. Once Aaron was revealed as a criminal, Nicole was no longer viewed as an innocent bystander. Her co-workers stopped eating lunch with her, and she often found herself alone in the cafeteria. Even patients began avoiding her. One day, a mother and child turned around and left the moment they saw her. That was when it hit Nicole: she was becoming a pariah. It hurt deeply. None of this was her fault, yet she was being ostracized. "Hello, Cassandra," she said, calling the mother of some of her younger patients, a woman she'd often helped with medical forms and exams. "Do you think your husband could help me? I'm trying to find a lawyer for my mother-in-law." Cassandra's husband was an attorney, and Nicole hoped their past friendly relationship would convince him to take on Tina's case. "It's not going to happen," Cassandra replied coolly. "Cody can't risk his reputation by representing criminals," she added before hanging up. "That's the last time I go out of my way to help anyone," Nicole thought bitterly, realizing she had no one else to turn to. Not only Nicole, but also her daughter, Dana, began to feel the weight of public disdain. Teachers at Dana's preschool started treating her with suspicion, worried that the daughter of a criminal might be a bad influence or even a danger to the other children. One day, a pair of earrings went missing from another girl in the class, and naturally, everyone immediately pointed fingers at Dana. "Open your cubby, now," the teacher demanded sternly. Dana shrank in fear but obeyed. The teacher rummaged through her belongings, scattering them across the floor, but the earrings were nowhere to be found. Dana felt deeply humiliated. Being accused of theft stung, and she couldn't hold back her tears. Ironically, the earrings turned up shortly afterward. Their owner had forgotten them while playing with a dollhouse. "Well, fine. Maybe we were wrong this time," the teacher said dismissively. "But isn't the daughter of a criminal capable of stealing? We need to keep a close eye on her from now on." Dana overheard the comment. In her young mind, confusion grew. Why were people calling her father a criminal? Why was she being treated so unfairly when she hadn't done anything wrong? She couldn't understand, but she knew one thing for certain: she wanted to be with her mom. Nicole always seemed to have the right words to make everything better. The search for Aaron continued. Nicole was summoned to the police station again to give additional statements. A few days later, the police conducted a search of her home. "Has your husband tried to contact you?" an investigator asked her sternly. "I've already told you, no," Nicole replied, her frustration boiling over. "I have no idea where he is. He left me too, without a word." Her emotional outburst was convincing. The police, having checked her call history beforehand, had to admit that Aaron hadn't contacted her. "His description has been circulated to all airports nationwide," the investigator informed her. "It's only a matter of time before he's caught." Nicole nodded. She wanted him found as much as anyone else did. She tried to focus on work to distract herself. Though her patient load had decreased significantly, there was always something to do at the clinic, and staying busy kept her from losing her mind. But even that stability crumbled. "Nicole, you're fired." The words from the head physician left her stunned. For a moment, she couldn't even process their meaning. "Wait, what? Why? What did I do wrong?" "The decision was made due to your repeated tardiness," the doctor said coldly. "But I'm never late," Nicole protested, frowning. "I'm always the first to arrive." And it was absolutely true. Since Nicole lived far from the clinic, she had to wake up at the crack of dawn to warm up her car and ensure she arrived on time. Often, she was the first to show up, greeted only by the security guard, who was always amazed at how early she arrived. Her boss was well aware of this, but he couldn't afford to keep the wife of a criminal on staff. He feared the bad reputation could tarnish the clinic, which would harm its operations. So, in agreement with the upper management, he intentionally changed Nicole's schedule without informing her, ensuring she would appear to be tardy. "You did this on purpose," she said in a hollow voice. "Pack your things," her former boss replied curtly. Nicole had no choice but to comply. Now she was left not only without her husband and mother-in-law, but also without the job she loved. Returning to her empty apartment, she was overcome with loneliness. The silence and isolation felt suffocating. She eagerly waited for the end of the day so she could pick up Dana and escape the unbearable solitude. The next day, Nicole began searching for a new job. She couldn't stay home, the walls seemed to close in on her. More pressing was the fact that her money was running out. Aaron had left her nothing, and her last paycheck was nearly gone. Finding a suitable job proved to be a challenge. Some places had no openings, while others bluntly stated they wouldn't hire someone with her reputation. When Nicole was on the verge of despair, she received an unexpected piece of good news. The police had concluded that Tina's only fault lay in failing to raise her son properly. They decided to release the elderly woman on a signed promise not to leave the area. Nicole was overjoyed and greeted her mother-in-law with a warm hug outside the detention center. She held no grudge against Tina, understanding that she was simply a victim of circumstances. "Has Aaron called?" was the first thing Tina asked, her face filled with hope. Nicole grimly shook her head. Tina's shoulders slumped. "The most important thing is that he's safe, wherever he is," Tina said in a sorrowful voice. Nicole suppressed her irritation. She couldn't bring herself to pity the man whose actions had brought so much suffering to their family. Dana, meanwhile, opened up to her mother about the mistreatment she was enduring at school. "Sweetheart, none of this is your fault," Nicole said gently. "Some people just don't know how to behave." "Mama, can I not go back there?" Dana pleaded tearfully. Nicole's heart ached, knowing her little girl was suffering because of her father's mistakes. "Of course," she said, trying to muster a comforting smile. "You can stay with Grandma. She just got back from a special retreat." To avoid traumatizing her daughter, Nicole lied, telling Dana that Grandma had gone on a little vacation to improve her health. In truth, Tina's condition was worsening, which was one of the reasons she had been released from detention. No one wanted the death of a pensioner, especially when her guilt had not been proven. However, Tina continued to hide the state of her health. Seeing how much Nicole was struggling, she chose not to add to the tension. Soon, Nicole managed to find a job. The only place willing to hire her was a social support fund for the homeless. She agreed immediately. She had never felt any aversion to such people, and in her situation, there was no room for being choosy. Nicole started her new duties promptly. The social fund needed a medic, and Nicole fit the bill perfectly. The previous nurse had gone on maternity leave, and the position had been vacant for months. After familiarizing herself with the job, Nicole was somewhat bewildered. She had expected the clinic to have a far more extensive supply of medications, especially given that many of the center's visitors had various health complaints. She tried discussing this with her manager, but he was in a hurry and couldn't spare her the time. "My head is killing me, splitting in two," complained one elderly homeless woman, barely able to walk with her cane. Nicole checked the meager medical cabinet and realized she had nothing to help. "Please wait a moment," she said, grabbing her jacket and heading to the nearest pharmacy. She spent a significant amount of her own money to stock up on supplies to help the center's visitors. The expense took a noticeable toll on her finances, but the homeless patients felt better. "Thank you, dear," the elderly woman said warmly, smiling at Nicole. Not long after, Nicole noticed that the few medications she had stocked were beginning to disappear. They were scarce and much more expensive than over-the-counter painkillers. However, she had no other choice but to buy more, keeping the receipts just in case. "Could I have a moment of your time?" She finally managed to catch her manager and decided to have a serious discussion. "Of course," he smiled. "I've actually been meaning to talk to you too." "Let me start," he said, his eyes gleaming. "I've noticed you've been very enthusiastic about your duties. I'd like to strongly suggest you slow down." "What do you mean?" Nicole asked, confused. "I mean, you need to stop using so many medications," the manager said bluntly. "Switch to alternative remedies. Our organization needs to cut costs." "Excuse me, but I can't treat people with dandelions and fairy dust," Nicole said dryly. "Then you'll need to learn how," the boss said with a squint, leaving no room for argument. Nicole stared at him, wide-eyed. Was he really serious? "If you want to keep working here, you'll listen to me. If not, no one will keep you here," he said firmly. That ended their conversation. Nicole was left alone with her dark thoughts. The situation seemed hopeless. Without medication, even with her medical knowledge, she couldn't help her patients. She couldn't afford to spend any more of her own money. Doing so would leave her family hungry. All she could do was hope that somehow things would work out. On her way to work that morning, Nicole was in a bad mood. She had run out of medication, and some of the homeless people had to be told that she couldn't help them, which weighed heavily on her mind. The road to work passed by a pond that Nicole usually admired as she drove. But today, she noticed something unusual. Upon closer inspection, she realized someone was drowning. "Oh my God," she exclaimed, slamming on the brakes and rushing out of the car. It was mid-spring, but still too cold for swimming. Nevertheless, Nicole quickly took off her light jacket and ran toward the drowning man. He was a young, fairly large man, and she struggled to pull him to the shore. At one point, she thought they might both drown because of how heavy he was. Once on the shore, Nicole tried to revive him. She turned him on his side and gently pressed on his back so he could expel the water he had swallowed. After a few long minutes, characteristic coughing sounds began, and the man slowly started to regain consciousness. "Thank you," he rasped. Nicole just nodded her head. "How did you end up in the water?" she couldn't help but ask. "Oh, just my own stupidity," the man confessed. His name was Timothy, and he was a homeless man. A few minutes earlier, he had seen a rich lady walking across the bridge, and she dropped a brooch. He jumped in after it, but misjudged his strength and the current, and he began to drown. If Nicole hadn't arrived in time, his fate would have been grim. "Did you at least get the brooch?" she asked, shaking her head. "Of course," he said triumphantly, pulling the prize from his pocket, the brooch that almost cost him his life. Nicole glanced down at her own clothes, soaked through. There was no way she could go to work like this. She decided to go home to change. Timothy offered to walk her to her car, and a brief conversation began between them. It turned out that in the past, Timothy had had a good job and an apartment, but he had been betrayed by his own sister. She took his home and did everything she could to get him fired. Disillusioned with life, Timothy had chosen to become a drifter. "Well, you can live with someone under one roof for so many years and still not know them," Nicole nodded, understanding. "A sad experience of your own?" Timothy asked curiously. She nodded, not wanting to go into detail. "Thanks again," the homeless man said sincerely. "I think it would be right if I give it back to you." Timothy handed her the brooch. It was a beautiful piece, shaped like a swan, elegant and undoubtedly very expensive. "No, it's fine," Nicole shook her head. "You went through so much to get it, it's yours." "Yes, but you showed me that there are things far more important than a trinket." And with that, he gently placed the brooch in her palm and said his goodbyes. Despite the chilly morning swim and being late for work, the encounter with Timothy left a pleasant aftertaste. He seemed like a good, kind man who was on the streets solely because of the betrayal by his own sister. When Nicole finally arrived at work, she found her boss waiting in her office. He was sitting at her desk, seemingly waiting for her. "Well, you've been caught, Nicole," he said maliciously. "You think I wouldn't find out you've been stealing medication? Think again, I know everything." Nicole frowned. Looking over her shoulder, she noticed that the cabinet with the medication was half empty, even though she had filled it just yesterday. "It wasn't me," she said in a cold, firm voice. The recent conversation with him came rushing back to her memory, and she began to understand what this little show was all about. Besides her boss, there were a few more staff members in the room. Likely witnesses, she guessed. "The keys to the medication storage were only with you," he continued to press on. "So, no one else could have committed this crime. It's unbelievable to steal from the poor and downtrodden." Nicole felt like crying and laughing at the same time. It was so absurd, so terribly unfair. "The keys were with you too," she pointed out reasonably. "How dare you accuse me?" her boss snapped, irritated by the accusation. "There will be a board meeting tonight where your behavior will be discussed," and with those words, the small delegation left the office. Nicole felt so tired from this tirade that she collapsed onto the couch in exhaustion. When will this endless stream of problems finally end? Nicole said bitterly, covering her face with her hands. Nicole had forgotten the last time she had slept well, instead of being tormented by obsessive thoughts about work, her husband, her daughter, and her mother-in-law. The time until the board meeting seemed to stretch endlessly. She had already walked around the social fund building several times. When she was finally invited in, she noticed that there was a table in the center where 3 people were sitting, one of whom was her boss. He wore a proud grin on his face that practically screamed he was the winner and Nicole was finished. On the opposite side sat other staff members from the social fund. "You are accused of stealing expensive medical supplies," began an unfamiliar elderly man. "What do you have to say in your defense?" Nicole then told everything she knew, starting from the moment she was hired and ending with her recent conversation with her boss. "Is this true?" the chairman of the board asked, turning to Nicole's boss. "Of course not," he quickly crossed himself in denial. Nicole continued speaking. "To treat the patients, I had to buy medication with my own money. And she provided the commission with the receipts. So what reason would I have to steal from myself?" The commission was stunned. The boss had painted a picture of a thief in front of them, but the reality was that Nicole was an honest woman. They asked him to wait while they left to make their decision. In the end, Nicole was exonerated on all counts and was able to keep her position. Her boss took the news with clenched teeth. After the board meeting, Nicole felt like she could finally breathe, but not for long. When she returned home, more problems awaited her. Tina's condition had worsened. Fortunately, a neighbor had stopped by and was able to call an ambulance. Dana was there, looking very frightened. "Mom, is Grandma going to die?" the little girl asked with fear in her eyes. She said that herself when the doctor came. "Of course not, darling," Nicole hurried to comfort her daughter. "Grandma's just not herself right now. They'll treat her, and she won't say such nonsense anymore." After calming Dana, Nicole drove to the clinic. There, she learned that her mother-in-law had been hiding her illness for a long time. Tina had reached a critical point, so they kept her in the hospital under close observation. The elderly woman never regained consciousness. "There's no point in you staying here," the doctor said. "The patient could remain in this condition for hours. I will call you when she regains consciousness." Nicole drove home, and since there was no one else to take care of Dana, her daughter had to return to the orphanage. Along with that, another problem emerged. Every day, the little girl threw tantrums, refusing to go, and in the evening, she would come back in a sad mood because the other children were bullying her. Nicole visited the orphanage several times to talk to the caregiver, but it didn't seem to help much. Dana still came back in tears. In those moments, Nicole felt like she was about to break down herself. She was torn between work, where the pressure from her boss weighed heavily on her, and home, where Dana was upset and her mother couldn't help her. The only thing that comforted her were the talks with Timothy, who had become a good friend. He listened to her and tried to offer advice. I feel like I can't take it anymore, Nicole confessed, not afraid to show her vulnerability. You'll make it, the homeless man encouraged her. You're one of the strongest women I've ever met. You just need a few days to rest, recover, and then you'll come back even stronger and handle everything. His warm words and genuine belief in her gave Nicole strength. After such conversations, she would return home feeling calmer. On the weekend, when Nicole decided to sleep in a bit longer, she was suddenly jolted awake by an insistent doorbell. Her first thought was that it was her husband, so she jumped up like she'd been scalded and ran to open the door. However, her thoughts were not meant to be realized. Standing at the door was a stranger. "I'm Aaron's mistress," she said instead of a greeting. Nicole grabbed the doorframe to keep herself from collapsing. "Is this some kind of joke?" She frowned. "Would I joke about something like that?" The unexpected visitor threw her hands up. Her name was Janice. She barged in, walking past Nicole into the apartment. In that moment, Nicole noticed that the woman was pregnant. "Is this Aaron's?" Nicole asked, unable to formulate her thoughts due to the shock. "Yes, it's Aaron's child," Janice smiled. "And now I'll be living here." Nicole's face twisted in disbelief at such audacity. "Are you sure you've got the right place?" She began to get angry. "If you want, you can run to your lover." "I don't care, take him with you, but don't you dare look at my apartment, it's mine." "I know that half of it belongs to Aaron," Janice narrowed her eyes. "And that means it belongs to me and his child too." Nicole felt her fists clench. "I won't let you live here," she said fiercely. A loud argument broke out between them, which could be heard even in the hallway. No matter how hard Nicole tried to prove that it was her apartment, Janice didn't care. She wasn't planning on leaving. "Do you have the audacity to throw a pregnant woman out onto the street?" Janice grabbed her belly. In the end, Nicole just waved her hand in frustration. She had no strength left to argue. "Stay in the living room, and don't you dare set foot in my room," she growled. Janice just smirked, realizing that she had gotten what she wanted. "It's just that you couldn't get pregnant by Aaron, so now you're pissed," Janice said, walking away. Nicole simply closed her eyes, telling herself to breathe and not react to the provocation. She couldn't feel at ease in her own home anymore, with the constant reminder of her husband's betrayal and lies looming near her. With Janice's presence in their life, Nicole became more and more certain that her marriage to Aaron was over, that nothing could fix it, and the only way out was a divorce. She no longer wanted to live with him. First, because he was a criminal, and second, because he was a cheater. It was a dangerous combination. Janice, on the other hand, was perfectly content. She swaggered around the apartment, considering herself the rightful owner. There were occasional small skirmishes between them, but no major conflicts. Nicole often visited her mother-in-law in the hospital. She would tell Tina about how things were going at home. Tina was still weak and sometimes couldn't even talk, so most of the time, Nicole just listened. She had to carefully filter the information she shared to avoid upsetting the already ill woman. "Don't worry, I'll manage," Nicole would smile at the end of each visit. Once, she even brought her a drawing that Dana had made for her grandmother. After Nicole left, Tina became very emotional. She asked for a lawyer to come and rewrite her will in Nicole's favor. "Aaron will be fine, he'll manage to make money for himself, but I'll make sure Nicole and the girl are taken care of," Tina thought to herself. Tina wasn't wealthy, but she owned a small house in the countryside. One could even say it was in the middle of nowhere. Now, that house was to become Nicole's. 3 days after Tina wrote her will, she passed away. As if sensing the end was near, she had urged the lawyer to hurry, and as it turned out, it was not in vain. Nicole received a call from the hospital late at night while she was already asleep. Seeing the unfamiliar number, her heart skipped a beat. Deep down, she knew who it was and why they might be calling her. "All right, I'll come in the morning," she said quietly. She spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. She didn't feel like sleeping at all. Her chest ached with pain and regret. Tears ran down her cheeks, but Nicole silently wiped them away and tried to breathe deeper. "You haven't been answering my calls for a few days, but I think you should know this," she exhaled, leaving a message on her husband's voicemail. "Your mother, or rather your adoptive mother, passed away tonight. The funeral will be the day after tomorrow." She wasn't sure if Aaron would listen to it, but she tried to warn him anyway. The last few days had been chaotic. Nicole was constantly running around the city, arranging funeral details, dealing with the hospital, and going to work. She would return home late and didn't have time to spend with Dana. "Mom, I want a belly like Janice's, too," the little girl suddenly said one morning while they were having breakfast together. Nicole couldn't help but laugh at the comment. She barely held back a smile. "Dana, you're still very little," her mother explained. "You need to grow up, start a family, and only then think about a belly like that." "Why?" the girl asked, confused. "I can just ask Janice to lend me hers." Nicole almost choked on her coffee. "What do you mean, lend?" She coughed and asked. "Well, she takes it off and puts it on." "I want to do that too," Dana smiled. And that's when Nicole seriously started to worry. Was Janice really pregnant? She shared her concerns with Timothy when they met again. "Dana couldn't have made that up," Nicole said. "Something's not right here." "You should set up a camera, then you'll know for sure," the drifter advised. "But make sure to do it discreetly." Nicole thought it was a good idea and decided to follow his advice. A few days later, she had irrefutable proof that Janice was a fraud, wearing a fake belly. The camera clearly showed how she took off the fake belly and spent the rest of the day without it, confident that Nicole and Dana would be gone all day. That bitch, Nicole couldn't hold back. "I'll make her life miserable." Nicole stormed into the apartment when Janice least expected it. She grabbed her by the arm and yanked her up off the couch. "What are you doing, you crazy woman?" Janice immediately screamed. "What if you hurt my baby?" "I know there's no baby," Nicole hissed, and to prove her point, she squeezed the foam on Janice's belly. Janice faced a total defeat. She had no reason to stay in the apartment anymore. But she still tried, and that's when Nicole needed Timothy's help. Together, they kicked the bold woman out into the stairwell, and then Nicole kindly handed her suitcase to her. Of course, she did this by throwing it from the 5th floor, but nevertheless, Janice got all her things. That was something, Timothy smirked, watching the scene. Yeah, Nicole tossed her hair back. With Janice gone from her life, Nicole could finally breathe freely. At least now she could feel like the mistress of her own home again, and the annoying guest was no longer underfoot. The next day, Nicole went to meet with the lawyer, who told her about Tina's will. Dana begged to come along, so Nicole reluctantly agreed but asked her daughter to sit quietly in the hallway. When Nicole learned about the little house in the countryside, she was shocked. Her mother-in-law had never mentioned that she owned property. Although, now that I think about it, she didn't tell me a lot of things, Nicole reflected, realizing that she didn't know not only Aaron, but also his mother. The meeting with the lawyer was cut short because Nicole received a call from her neighbor. At first, she ignored the call, but after 5 missed calls in a row, she finally picked up. Just a few minutes later, she was rushing home. She was told that her apartment was on fire. The neighbors had called the fire department on time, and the fire didn't spread to the other apartments. However, Nicole's home had suffered serious damage. "This is arson," the firefighters gave their verdict. Nicole grabbed her heart and fell to her knees. Who could do this to her? She hadn't harmed anyone in her life to deserve such revenge. "Thank God I brought you with me," Nicole said through tears, hugging little Dana. She had initially wanted to leave her daughter at home. If something had happened to the child, she wouldn't have been able to live anymore. "Is everyone okay?" Timothy asked hoarsely. Nicole nodded frantically. The drifter had run over as soon as he heard about the fire. As he ran, he prayed to himself that Nicole and her daughter would be safe, and seeing them alive now, he breathed a sigh of relief. By this time, Timothy had found a job as a night watchman at a grocery store located in the neighboring yard, and from some random passers-by, he learned about the nearby fire. "If you have nowhere to go, I can offer you my humble abode," Timothy suggested, a bit embarrassed. Of course, his shack wasn't exactly suitable for women to live in, but at least it was something. "Actually, there's another option," Nicole said, remembering the inheritance. "Tina, even from heaven, you saved me," she thought silently thanking her mother-in-law. Nicole wasn't sure what condition the little house she now owned would be in, so she asked Timothy to come with her in case any urgent repairs were needed. But to her great surprise, the house was in decent condition. Of course, the furniture was old, and there was a lot of dust, but all the basic living conditions were there. Nicole also found a small garden and a path leading to the river, where there was a lovely view. "It's so beautiful here," she smiled. Together, they managed to tidy up the house in one evening. By the end, Timothy was ready to leave, but Nicole stopped him. "I don't want to hear anything," she said in a tone that left no room for argument. "We need to celebrate the housewarming." They looked into each other's eyes for a long time. Timothy felt like he was losing his mind. Nicole had long intrigued him, and this day only proved that he feared losing her. In the end, he agreed, and they spent a quiet evening together. He would give anything to spend every day this way, as long as this wonderful woman was by his side. Nicole had similar thoughts. The case of the apartment arson was solved quickly. Since Nicole and her family were under close police watch, they were able to track down the arsonist very soon. It turned out to be none other than Aaron. He realized that he could face a serious prison sentence for his crimes, so he decided to destroy the evidence, most of which was kept at his house. Though Aaron was a crafty criminal, he knew very well that he wouldn't survive in prison. The foolish lover, Janice, failed to find anything, so he had to take matters into his own hands. In truth, Janice wasn't really trying to help her lover. She knew that near the evidence, there were also large sums of money, so she was more focused on finding that in the apartment. However, she was kicked out before she could find it, so the careless detective left empty-handed. Aaron waited until his wife and daughter left the apartment before starting his search. At first, everything went well, but then he heard a knock at the door, panicked, and decided to burn the apartment to make sure no one could find any incriminating evidence against him. God, what an idiot he is, Nicole shook her head when she learned everything. How could I have ever married such a person? Aaron was caught when he once again went to visit his lover. The criminal naively thought that the police didn't know about Janice's existence. However, she was under surveillance as well. The lover didn't want to see him. Since she hadn't been able to find the money, Aaron was no longer of any use to her. If he had been fun before, now he only reminded her of problems, and she didn't want to get involved with the police. So, she tried to throw him out. Aaron caused a scene, so loud that it attracted the attention of the neighbors. They were the ones who called the police. "Do you want to see your husband?" asked the investigator. "No way in hell," Nicole replied quickly. "Otherwise, you'll have to put me in jail too, because I won't hold back and will take care of him right there," she thought to herself, tactfully deciding not to voice her thoughts. "I understand," the police officer replied. "And by the way, I recommend hiring a lawyer, or your husband could face a significant prison sentence." "That's wonderful," Nicole smiled widely. "Let him pay for his actions in full. As for a lawyer, the state can provide him with one." Since Aaron ended up in prison for a long time, Nicole was granted a quick divorce. Her husband desperately begged for visits, but she refused. She had endured too much pain because of him. "Tell the prisoner to call his lover for a visit," Nicole said, even making the usually grim investigator smile. When the chapter of her life titled Aaron was successfully closed, Nicole began to notice that her life was slowly improving. A couple of months later, she married Timothy, and they finally moved to live in the countryside. In the house they had renovated themselves, adding even more coziness. Nearby, there was a horse ranch, where Timothy began taking Dana. The girl fell in love with the horses and even started taking riding lessons. This sparked a dream in her to become a top-notch equestrian and win competitions. Nicole didn't recognize her daughter. Lately, Dana's eyes were so bright, and she looked like a regular active child. And during the annual checkup, a miracle happened. "Congratulations," the doctor smiled sincerely, "your daughter is completely healthy." For Nicole, as a mother, those were the best words. She was incredibly happy. "I knew it, I believed," she said, wiping away her tears. 6 months after their marriage, Nicole learned she was pregnant. It was a huge surprise because she had thought she wouldn't be able to have another child. She had always been content with Dana. But this news made all of them incredibly happy. "I'm glad I'll have a child from you," Nicole admitted one evening when they were on the porch. "I hope it's a boy, and he'll look like you." "I dream of that too," Timothy smiled widely, hugging her even tighter. Their dreams came true. In due time, they had a son. If you enjoyed the story, please support it with a like and a comment. All the best to you.